And let me get this started first. Almost started without the camera on.
You want to do that?
Yeah. We're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 2 tonight. I believe we finished chapter 1 last time. And remember we went kind of sort of deep on some things in chapter 1. We're not going to do so much of that tonight in chapter 2 because this is the Lord giving Jeremiah his first sermon to go and tell the people. We've already seen in chapter 1 where the Lord told him what was going to, just briefly told him what was going to happen, how and all that, and kind of in a roundabout way. And it didn't really go into deep details, but told on the surface. We see, kind of get a picture of what is going to happen to Israel and Judah. And particularly with Jeremiah, it's going to be concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So in chapter 2 begins the series of sermons that the Lord is going to give Jeremiah to preach to the people. And so he goes a little bit, in each sermon, he goes a little bit deeper, gives a little bit more details. In his first sermon, though, he doesn't go as deep as he will later. So we'll see some things in this second chapter, but as we go into the study more, into the book more, it's almost like he gives a little bit more information with each sermon. So each sermon is a little bit deeper than the one before it. So even though this second chapter, this first sermon is fairly lengthy, maybe in their day they might have been able to understand this better than us, and understand, or at least Jeremiah anyway. I don't know about that the people would have, but at least had a better understanding a deeper understanding of what he's talking about in this chapter. For us, it's going to take us several chapters to catch on to everything, because he just touches things on the surface here, just like he did in chapter 1. But he like I said, he gets a little bit deeper with each chapter. We're not going to do as much historical data tonight as we've done in the past, because there's just not a need for it in this chapter. There's a little bit, but not much. So let's start with verse 1. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Go and cry in the ears of Jerusalem, saying, Thus saith the Lord, I remember thee, the kindness of thy youth, the love of thine espousals, when thou wentst after me in the wilderness, in a land that was not sown. Israel was holiness unto the Lord, and the firstfruits of his increase. All that devour him shall offend. Evil shall come upon them, saith the Lord. So this is, the Lord is looking back on Israel, on where she has been. Remember, he's talking about how things were in the wilderness. They sought the Lord in the wilderness. Now they've turned their back on him. And now we'll see as we go through this. The Lord's going to tell in detail through each sermon. We're going to see how Israel, or why Israel, how and why, and the what's and all that are going to come out on their turning their back on God. Remember, this is not a new thing, though. It's just come to a head now. And the Lord has had enough. And he says Israel was holiness unto the Lord, and the first fruits of his increase. Remember, the Lord called Israel out of the rest of the world. Remember, the founding fathers, if you will, of the nation of Israel were Gentile. Remember, it goes all the way, they trace the roots back to Abraham. Abraham came out of the land of the Chaldeans, remember? And he was a Gentile. His son Isaac was the first, so he was the one in Abraham's lineage. Remember, Abraham had other children, but Isaac was the one that Israel would come from. Verse 4, hear ye the word of the Lord, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord, what iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they are gone far from me, and have walked after vanity, and are become vain. The Lord's asking the people, what have I done? You know, what did I do? What have you found wrong in me that you would do these things? We know that it wasn't God's fault. It was the fault of the people. The blame goes on the people of Israel, not on the God of Israel. Verse 6, neither said they, where is the Lord that besought us up out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and of pits, through a land of drought and of the shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through, and where no man dwelt. And I brought you into a plentiful country, to eat the fruit thereof and the goodness thereof. But when ye entered, ye defiled my land, and made mine heritage an abomination. They've forgotten where they come from. You've heard that phrase, or heard that phrase. They forgot their upbringings. You know, you ever heard that? They have forgotten where they come from. They have forgotten where they were and how God brought them out, and where they've been, what they've been through to get to where they are. Remember, at one time when they first entered the Promised Land, it was a land of plenty. One of the things, and we'll see this when Babylon comes in towards later in the book. We'll see what destruction they bring. But a common practice in their day was when a country came in and took over another country, another nation, they destroyed all the natural resources that they had, so that when they left, there was nothing left for them people to go back to. And what you see in the Middle East today is exactly what's happened over there. Remember, in David's day and in Solomon's day, they were cutting the cedars out of Lebanon and bringing them down for the temple. And these were huge cedars. There were cedar forests. You don't see that over there today. Today, it's basically just scrub brush. You still see some, but not like you did in their day. There's not forest like there was in their day. It's a rocky and desolate land. And that's because of all the wars that they've had over there throughout the generations, particularly back in Bible times, Old Testament times. A nation would come in and just destroy, cut everything down. They cut all the trees down. And when they cut the forest down, you mess up the ecosystem. And when you do that, your crops are not going to grow, and your animals can't live without the crops. The people can't live without the crops. And now it's a desolate land over there. Verse 8, the priest said not, where is the Lord? So not even the priest cared for the Lord. And they that handle the law knew me not. The pastors also transgressed against me, and the prophets prophesied by Baal, and walked after things that did not profit. Remember, Jeremiah's father Hilkiah was the one in Josiah's day who found the book of the law in the temple. It had been missing for several years. Actually a couple of generations from the way it looks. They had lost the book of the law, and Josiah, when Hilkiah found it and brought it before the king, Josiah read it, or I believe he had it read to him, if I remember the story correctly. He had it read to him, and the king ordered that it be read before the people, because they hadn't heard it in a very long time. Here we see the Lord telling Jeremiah, and of course, he says, the priests say not, where is the Lord? The priests are not even asking, they're not even praying to the Lord, or at least not praying correctly anyway, the way that they were taught to pray. We see I want us to pay attention in this chapter, because a lot of what we're seeing in this chapter is a lot of what we're seeing today. And even in some of the Lord's churches, we see it today. The priests, the pastors, the teachers are not praying the way they ought to be praying. They're not doing the things in the Lord's house that they should be doing. The prophets prophesied by Baal. In other words, they weren't following the Lord, they were following Baal, a false god, and walked after things that do not profit. And he's talking about profiting spiritually. They were after money, after the profit of money. Wherefore I will yet plead with you, saith the Lord, and with your children's children will I plead. For pass over the isles of Chittim, and see, and send unto Kedar, and consider diligently, and see if there be such a thing. Doing a little bit of research on these Isles of Chittim, these supposedly in their day, there were some of the islands in the Mediterranean that this was referring to. The island of Cyprus was one of them. Kedar, one of the meaning of that word was black skin, people of black skin. Now that's not Africans like we think about. This would have been those on the Arabian Peninsula. They were darker skinned than the people of Israel. Verse 11: Hath a nation changed their gods, which are yet no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which doth not profit. The people of Israel have begun to follow other gods. He says, hath a nation changed their gods, which are yet not gods? We're going to see a lot of references to false gods in this study. So pay attention to that. Be astonished, O ye heavens, at this, and be horribly afraid. Be ye very desolate, saith the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns, that can hold no water. He's speaking on spiritual matters here. Who is the fountain of living water? That's Christ himself, right? And remember, all we're seeing here, or at least for now, we're seeing the Lord talking, and it leads me to believe that this is the Lord Jesus Christ here. There'll come a time where we'll see, he talks more on the basis of God the Father, but right now it's the Lord speaking, the Lord himself, and he refers to himself. He says, they have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, spiritually speaking, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. So they've left the fountain of living waters and have gone to these false these false religions and these false gods that will hold nothing. They're nothing compared to God. They're spiritually, they have no meaning at all in the matters of God. Is Israel a servant? Is he a homeborn slave? Why is he spoiled? The young lions roared upon him and yelled, and they made his land waste. His cities are burnt without inhabitant. Now, if I'm understanding this correctly, this is Israel, the second kingdom, or the northern kingdom. He goes back and forth, so we've got to be careful here, because he talks about Israel and Judah in places, and he talks about Israel, the nation as a whole, in places. I believe he's talking about Israel, the northern kingdom right now. And the reason I say that is the northern kingdom was taken first, before Judah was. The young lions roared upon him and yelled, and they made his land waste. His cities are burnt without inhabitant. Also the children of Noph and Tahaphans have broken the crown of thy head. Hast thou not procured this unto thyself, in that thou hast forsaken the Lord thy God when he led thee by the way? Up until this point, God's been with them all the time, but they've forsaken him. They've turned their backs on him. And now, what hast thou to do in the way of Egypt? To drink the waters of Seir, or what hast thou to do in the way of Assyria? To drink the waters of the river? Assyria will be the river Euphrates that he's talking about. I forgot to go back and look up Seir. I'm not sure what the meaning on that is. Maybe if I can remember, I'll do it next time. But anyway, we know in this story, if you've ever read through the book of Jeremiah, you know that Assyria or Babylon comes to take the land, and at some point Egypt also joins in as their ally of sorts, and does some things too. So that's why he's referencing both of them here. Thine own wickedness shall correct thee, and thy backslidings shall reprove thee. Now know therefore and see that it is an evil thing and bitter that thou hast forsaken the Lord thy God, and that my fear is not in thee, saith the Lord of hosts. I want you to notice here, he says, thou hast forsaken the Lord thy God. These are God's people. These are not lost people. These are God's people. They have forsaken him. This doctrine out there that says that we can lose our salvation, that doesn't fit. Doesn't work. These people were God's people. They were saved people. But they've turned their back on God. And we see it today. It's nothing new for us. But in their day, it's kind of hard for us to imagine, to think back, and we see these people, that this nation in particular, or two nations, if you will, where God's people were, they had lost people and saved people both in the nations. We know that. You can read through the Old Testament and see it. But here, the Lord is talking to his people here, not to the rest of the world. He's talking to his elect, his chosen people. They have turned their back on him. Now we know, we'll read, when we get later in the study, we'll see where there was a remnant that never turned their back on the Lord. But he's specifically calling out here the ones who have. Verse 20, for of old time I have broken thy yoke and burst thy bands, and thou saidst, I will not transgress, when upon every high hill and under every green tree thou wanderest, playing the harlot. Now, I'm not going to get into it tonight. Our Sunday school teacher has mentioned he's going to do a brief study on the groves at some point. Well, we'll see, but this will come up again. in Jeremiah. So if you don't get to it, we'll get to it in Jeremiah at some point. So I don't want to touch that right now. But what he's talking about here is he's talking about their high hill, the high places that are mentioned in other places in the scripture. The green tree, every green tree, it's the evergreen groves where they worship the false gods. That's what he's talking about here. They played the harlot. In other words, they committed spiritual adultery. And they did it in their own land. They didn't go outside their land to do it. They did it inside their own land. The land. And remember back a few verses, let's see. In verse 7, he says, "But when ye entered, ye defiled my land." They defiled the land that God gave them. Back in verse 19, he says, "Thine own wickedness shall correct thee, and thy backsliding shall reprove thee." Think about that. When a child does wrong and they have to be punished for it, it's that doing wrong that is the beginning of the correction. And that's what he's saying here. Because they did wickedness, they're going to be corrected. They would not have, if they hadn't done wicked, they wouldn't have been corrected. The reason they're being corrected is because they done wicked. And so a lot of this study is going to hinge on that point, because what we're going to see is how wicked they got and how bad it got in Jeremiah's day. Verse 21, "Yet I had planted thee a noble vine, holy, a right seed. How then art thou turned into the degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me?" God had given them everything they needed in the land of Israel. In the promised land, they were given everything. They had no need of anything. Yet they sought outside their borders with their neighbors. They let their neighbors come in, and they polluted the land of God, the land that God gave them. For though thou wash thee with nitre, and take thee much soap, yet thine iniquity is marked before me, saith the Lord. Nothing you can do can wash it off, in other words. You ever heard that saying that Ajax won't even take it off? That's the condition they're in. How canst they say, I am not polluted? I have not gone after Balaam. See thy way in the valley. Know what thou hast done. Thou art a swift dromedary traversing her ways. The people have said, they've said they're not polluted. They haven't committed adultery as far as they're concerned. Well, they're asking, what have we done wrong? We didn't follow after Balaam. We didn't follow after a false god. What do we hear today in religious circles? Well, we're following the Lord's will, or we're following what the Lord told us to follow, or what the Lord's told us. But does it match the Scripture? What you're doing, does it match what the Lord has in His Word? And if it doesn't, then you got a problem. How canst thou? Well, I already read that. Verse 24. A wild ass used to the wilderness, that snuffeth up the wind of her pleasure, in her occasion, who can turn her away? All they that seek her will not weary themselves. In her mouth they shall find her. Withhold thy foot from being unshod, and thy throat from thirst. But thou saidst, there is no hope. No, for I have loved strangers, and after them will I go. They followed after strangers. They left the Lord for strange gods. As a thief is ashamed when he is found, so is the house of Israel ashamed they, their kings, their princes, and their priests, and their prophets, saying to a stock, Thou art my father, and to a stone, Thou hast brought me forth. For they have turned their back unto me, and not their face, but in the time of their trouble they will say, Arise and save us. How many times have we seen Israel turn their back on God, and when things got bad, when He came and chastised them, they were ready for Him to save them? We've seen it over and over in their history. It's happened. Now they've gone too far. And there's going to come a point in this story where they're going to want to come back, or they're going to say they want to come back, but they're not going to. They're still going to reject Him in the end. He says, saying to a stock, and Thou art my father, and a stone, Thou hast brought me forth. They're putting more faith in things, in created things, rocks and sticks and whatever else they were worshiping, than they are in God. But where are thy gods that thou hast made thee? Let them arise, if they can save thee in the time of thy trouble, for according to the number of thy cities are thy gods, O Judah. Now God's referring, he's speaking to Judah here. Remember before he was speaking to Israel. Now it's to Judah. He's telling them, where's your gods? Where are they at? Why don't they save you? Why is it whenever you're in trouble you come to me, but when things are good you run the other direction? Now you got these false gods. You've put all your faith in them. Call on them. Have them come save you. We see how that worked for, remember the prophets of Baal and Elijah. Yeah. See how that worked for them? Didn't work too well, did it? Same thing in Jeremiah's day. These false gods are nothing. They can't do anything. They can't speak. They can't hear. They can't see. They're nothing. And notice he says, for according to the number of thy cities are thy gods. They got gods, enough gods for every city. And what I understand that to say is, a lot of times in their day in particular, and we see it somewhat today in some areas, they believed that there was a God for that city. That each city had a chief god, and it was like, the Catholics now have a saint for everything. This saint's for, it's the patron saint of the sailors and soldiers, or the patron saint of blacksmith or something. They come up with all these wild imaginations on these saints, and it's kind of the same thing with here. They've got a patron god of their city, of each city. Wherefore will ye plead with me? Ye all have transgressed against me, saith the Lord. Everybody's transgressed, he says, against him. In vain have I smitten your children. They receive no correction. Your own sword hath devoured your prophets like a destroying lion. You've killed the prophets that I've sent to you. That's referenced in many places in the Scripture where they did that. I believe even Christ mentioned it in the New Testament, where that they had killed their own prophets when they came preaching the truth. O generation, see ye the word of the Lord. Have I been a wilderness unto Israel, a land of darkness? Wherefore say my people, we are lords. We will come no more unto thee. Can a maid forget her ornaments, or a bride her attire? Yet my people have forgotten me days without number. It's been a long time since they've remembered the Lord. And notice he says, we are lords. We will come no more unto thee. They're their own gods, in other words. Why trimmest thou thy way to seek love? Wherefore hast thou also taught the wicked ones thy ways? Even the wicked in the land. They've taught the unsaved, in other words. They've taught them their ways. We see that in religion today. People try to force their beliefs on unsaved people. And I mean, when I say force their beliefs, I'm not talking about the truth. I'm talking about false doctrine. They'll try to force false doctrine on the unsaved, and they don't. They usually just follow right along with it, and so you've got these people that make false professions because they've been taught a false doctrine. Just like this free will doctrine of the Lord's the sinner's prayer. Remember, our so-called sinner's prayer. It's a false doctrine, it's false teaching, it's a false gospel, and people fall for it. And even the lost pray a sinner's prayer and think they've been saved, and it's fooled many a people. Also in thy skirts is found the blood of the souls of the poor innocents. I have not found it by secret search, but upon all these. Yet thou sayest, because I am innocent, surely his anger shall turn from me. Behold, I will plead with thee, because thou sayest, I have not sinned. The people are going to say they've not sinned. They're going to say, why is God punishing us? What have we done? They're not even going to recognize their own sin. Why gettest thou about so much to change thy way? Thou also shalt be ashamed of Egypt, as thou wast ashamed of Assyria. There's the two countries, the two nations that are going to overtake them. Yea, thou shalt go forth from him, and thine hands upon thy head, for the Lord hath rejected thy confidences, and thou shalt not prosper in them. We'll stop there for tonight. This goes on into the next chapter. We'll pick up with chapter 3 next time. But remember, all this, what we're reading, is like I mentioned earlier, is going to hinge on the sins of Israel, the nation as a whole, but mostly Judah. Jeremiah mostly concerns himself with the kingdom of Judah and the city of Jerusalem in particular, because that's where he is. Remember, it is the sins of the people, the sins of God's people, not just the people that are citizens there, but the people that are God's people. God's people have turned their back on him, and God's had enough of it. So we'll stop there for tonight.